This day and time. What happened today, years ago?
Welcome to The Deep Dive. We're the podcast where we take a whole stack of sources and really unpack the most important nuggets of knowledge for you. Today, we're diving into something pretty fascinating, a collection of historical accounts that really show just how impactful, well, a single date or maybe the days right around it can be. We're talking about June 24th. It's a day that, maybe surprisingly, pops up again and again as the backdrop for these huge military and political turning points all through history. Seriously, from the Middle Ages right up to the Cold War, this one spot on the calendar just seems to have this knack for, shaping destiny.
It is fascinating, isn't it? How you get these events that seem completely unconnected, different centuries, different places, but they all cluster around this date. And each one marks, a really significant shift, power changing hands, nations being born, huge conflicts kicking off. So we're going to explore 5 of those moments today. It's kind of a shortcut to understanding just how significant they were.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this. Let's find those surprising connections and give you that shortcut to being, well, really informed about a period defined by some truly fateful decisions. Aye, the birth of a nation. The Battle of São Mamede, 1128. Right, so first up, we're heading way back. 1128, we've got this pretty dramatic family feud, but with massive consequences. The Battle of São Mamede. And this wasn't just, any old battle. People often call it the birth event of a whole nation, Portugal.
That's right, yeah. The background is basically a power struggle, a civil war, really, for the county of Portugal. It's between a mother, Countess Teresa, and her own son, Afonso Henrique. You see, Teresa was leaning towards the Galician nobility. She even had this romantic alliance with a very influential Galician count, Fernão de Trava, and this really alienated the local Portuguese nobles. They felt pushed aside.
Ah, okay. So the Portuguese nobles see their chance, maybe for more power, more autonomy, and they rally behind the son, Afonso.
Exactly. They saw him as their best bet for, carving out their own space.
And the battle itself, São Mamede, happened in Guimarães. That was Afonso's hometown, right? Why there? Was it symbolic or?
Both, really. Guimarães was a key stronghold, but it also held significant symbolic weight for Afonso and his supporters. It represented their cause. So his forces fought fiercely there, right on June 24th, for this ideal of, Portuguese independence.
And they won.
Oh, completely. A decisive victory. Countess Teresa was forced out, into exile, actually.
Wow. And the impact, the legacy?
Huge. Afonso immediately gained full control of the county. He declared himself prince. Then later, in 1139, he was recognized as king of Portugal. And this wasn't just him saying it. Leon recognized his kingship in 1143, and even the Pope eventually acknowledged it in 1179.
So this battle on this date, it really did lay the groundwork, the foundation for an independent Portugal that lasted for centuries.
Absolutely. It's a starting point. Scotland's fierce independence. The Battle of Bannockburn, 1314.
Okay, so while Portugal is kind of finding its feet as a kingdom, fast forward about 2 centuries, different part of Europe, Scotland, and there's another nation fighting just as fiercely, maybe even more so, for its survival. And remarkably, it climaxes again around June 24th. We're talking Bannockburn, 1314, a name that just screams Scottish independence.
The context is England trying, relentlessly really, to impose its rule on Scotland after this succession crisis they'd had. Robert the Bruce, he'd already stepped up and claimed the Scottish throne, but let's be clear, he was facing the massive military power of England under Edward II.
Right, a huge mismatch on paper. The battle happens near Stirling Castle, Bannockburn. You mentioned Bruce's strategy was brilliant. What made it work? Those schiltrons, for instance.
Yeah, the schiltrons were key, but it started with the terrain. Bruce was smart. He picked this difficult, boggy ground near the Bannockburn stream. It basically acted as a bottleneck, It neutralized England's advantage in heavy cavalry and numbers. He also had his men dig these hidden pits, traps for the horses. And then, yes, the schiltrons, these tightly packed formations of soldiers with really long pikes pointing outwards, like giant hedgehogs. On June 23rd, there were some initial clashes, but the main event was the 24th. The English forces, especially the cavalry, got completely bogged down, disoriented in the terrain. And the Scottish schiltrons just held firm and then pushed back. It was decisive. King Edward himself barely escaped, had to flee the battlefield.
Incredible. And the result of that victory, it wasn't just a single battle won, was it?
Not at all. This was the victory. Scotland secured its independence from England for nearly 400 years after this. And Robert the Bruce, well, he became this legendary national hero. His status was cemented right there.
So Bannockburn really stands as this powerful example. Tactical smarts, determination, overcoming huge odds to basically forge a nation's future.
Absolutely. It's deeply woven into Scotland's national story. 3. Napoleon's ill-fated gamble. The invasion of Russia is 1812.
Okay, so from battles that kind of built nations, let's jump forward again. Now we're looking at an empire potentially unraveling, Napoleon. And another June 24th, this time 1812, marks the start of his absolutely catastrophic invasion of Russia. A massive gamble that went terribly wrong.
Terribly wrong is putting it mildly. Yeah, the background here involves Russia increasingly chafing under Napoleon's continental system. That was his big economic blockade against Britain. Russia wasn't really enforcing it strictly. Plus, there were growing tensions over other territories, like Poland and the Balkans. Things were coming to a head.
So Napoleon decides force is the answer.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He assembled this colossal army, the Grande Armée. Estimates vary, but somewhere around 450,000 troops, maybe even more, drawn from all across his empire.
And on June 24th, they start crossing the Neman River into Russian territory. What was the plan? What did Napoleon expect? Was it meant to be quick?
Oh, definitely. That was Napoleon's whole model, wasn't it? Swift campaigns, decisive battles, force the enemy to the negotiating table on his terms. He absolutely expected something similar here. Go in, find the Russian army, smash it in the major battle, Tsar Alexander makes peace. Done.
But Russia didn't play ball.
Not at all. They had a completely different strategy, and a very cunning one, looking back. Constant retreat. They refused to give Napoleon that decisive battle he wanted. They just kept falling back deeper and deeper into Russia.
And the scorched earth tactic, too.
Yes, crucially. Burning crops, villages, supplies, anything the invading French army might use, they denied them resources. This was designed specifically to stretch Napoleon's supply lines, which were already struggling in the vastness of Russia, and just wear down his army physically and mentally.
So instead of a quick victory...
It became this long, drawn-out slog. And then, of course, the infamous Russian winter set in.
Right. The combination was just devastating.
Utterly catastrophic. The retreat from Moscow is one of the great military disasters in history. Napoleon lost the vast majority of his army. It wasn't just a defeat, it was the beginning of the end for him. His aura of invincibility was shattered. His empire started to crumble afterward.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How these grand, ambitious plans can just completely fall apart. Not necessarily through direct combat, but because of things like logistics, environment, and just unexpected resistance strategies.
Exactly. The elements and sheer resilience can be just as powerful as any army. 4. The opening salvo of the Cold War. The Berlin Blockade, 1948.
Okay, let's shift gears dramatically now. Mid-20th century, World War II is over, but a new kind of tension is brewing. We land on June 24th, 1948. The Berlin Blockade begins. This event really marks the opening, you could say, of a whole new era, the Cold War.
Yeah, it's a very clear starting pistol in many ways. So after World War II, Germany and Berlin itself were divided into 4 occupation zones: American, British, French, and Soviet. Now, Berlin was physically located deep inside the Soviet zone of Germany. That's important.
Right, an island within their territory.
Exactly. And in June 1948, the Western Allies, the US, UK, and France, introduced a new currency, the Deutschmark, into their zones of West Germany and West Berlin. Stalin saw this as a deliberate, provocative move. He felt it was aimed at undermining Soviet influence and solidifying a separate West German state.
So his response was drastic.
Extremely. On June 24th, the Soviets cut off all land and water access to the western sectors of Berlin. Roads, railways, canals, everything blocked.
What was he hoping to achieve? Just disrupt things, or was it more?
Oh, it was more absolutes than that. His clear objective was to starve West Berlin into submission, to force the Western powers to abandon their sectors of the city entirely. He wanted all of Berlin under Soviet control.
But the West didn't back down.
No, they responded with something quite remarkable: the Berlin airlift. Operation Vittles, the Americans called it. For almost a year, nearly 11 months, Allied aircraft flew supplies into West Berlin around the clock. Food, fuel, medicine, everything the city needed to survive.
It must have been an incredible sight.
Absolutely. Hundreds of planes landing and taking off constantly at Tempelhof and other airfields. They flew nearly 300,000 flights in total. They delivered something like 2.3 million tons of supplies. It was a monumental logistical feat and a powerful symbol of Western resolve.
And eventually Stalin had to back down.
Yes, in May 1949, he lifted the blockade. It was clear the airlift was working and he wasn't going to achieve his goal.
But the impact lingered, didn't it?
Hugely. The blockade and the airlift solidified the division of Germany and Europe. Berlin became this potent, enduring symbol of the Cold War standoff, the stark division between East and West.
So that June 24th decision by Stalin really set the stage for decades of tension. It highlighted that commitment, that resolve, could stand up to aggression.
Definitely a pivotal moment. It drew the lines very clearly. Be the unsung tragedy, Operation Ariel in the Lancastria, June 1940.
Okay, for our final deep dive, we're going back slightly to World War II, June 1940. This is a period maybe overshadowed by the famous Dunkirk evacuation, which had just finished. But there was another massive evacuation effort, Operation Ariel. And within that, a truly horrific but lesser-known tragedy involving the HMT Lancastria.
That's right. Dunkirk mainly evacuated troops from the beaches near the Franco-Belgian border. But after France collapsed, there were still tens, hundreds of thousands of British and Allied troops, plus civilians, stranded further south and west in France. So Operation Ariel was launched to get them out. It ran roughly from June 15th to June 25th. Ships were sent to ports like Cherbourg, Saint-Malo, Brest, Saint-Nazaire, La Rochelle. It was actually incredibly successful in many ways.
How many people did they manage to rescue?
They got about 200,000 soldiers out and maybe around 20,000 civilians too. A huge number considering the circumstances.
But amidst this success, there was this awful event with the Lancastria. What happened there? It was around June 17th, wasn't it? Just before our focus date, but part of this same crucial period.
Yes, June 17th. The HMT Lancastria, a former ocean liner pressed into service as a troop ship, was anchored off the coast of Saint-Nazaire. It was absolutely crammed with people, soldiers, RAF personnel, civilians, women, children, desperate to escape the advancing German army.
How many people are we talking? The numbers seem uncertain.
They are uncertain, tragically so. Official records weren't kept in the chaos. Estimates range wildly from maybe 5,000 up to possible 9,000 people crammed onto a ship designed for far fewer. Then, German bombers attacked. The Lancastria took several direct hits and sank incredibly quickly, reportedly in just 20 minutes.
20 minutes? With thousands on board, the loss of life must have been
Staggering. Again, exact figures are impossible, but it's generally accepted that at least 3,000 people died. Some estimates go much higher, maybe 4,000, 5,000, even more. To give you some perspective, that's more lives lost than on the Titanic and the Lusitania combined. It's Britain's worst single maritime disaster ever.
But you said it's lesser known. Why? If it was that catastrophic.
Well, what's really striking, you find this in the sources, is that the British government under Winston Churchill immediately suppressed the news. They put a D notice on it, basically censoring the story.
Why on earth would they do that?
The timing. This was June 1940. France had just fallen. Britain stood virtually alone. Invasion seemed imminent. Churchill feared that news of such a massive disaster would absolutely crush public morale at the most critical moment imaginable.
So it was deliberately kept quiet.
Yes. For years, really, became this sort of forgotten tragedy. Of course, the survivors and families knew, but it wasn't widely reported or acknowledged. It's a really stark reminder, isn't it, of the hidden costs of war, the things that don't always make the headlines, and also the very complex role of information and censorship during wartime, how governments try to manage morale.
A chilling story hidden within that rescue operation period around late June. Outro. So looking back at these 5 moments, São Mamede, Bannockburn, Napoleon's invasion, the Berlin Blockade, and the Lancastria tragedy within Operation Ariel, it's clear that this period around June 24th has just repeatedly been this crucible, a time for critical decisions. You've got nations being born, independence being fought for, huge imperial gambles, the opening moves of global conflicts.
And if you try to connect and maybe draw a bigger picture, what really stands out is how specific choices, often made under incredible pressure on or very near this particular date, really can set the course of history, sometimes for hundreds of years. It really underscores the ripple effects of leadership, of resolve, and sometimes just the sheer unpredictability of events.
Yeah, each story we've dived into, it's not just about what happened, but trying to understand the why. You get these insights into ambition, into resilience, but also those hidden, sometimes darker realities of conflict and power.
Exactly. And maybe it leaves you, the listener, with an interesting question to think about. How many other dates on the calendar might hold a similar concentration of these pivotal world-shaping events? If we look closely, what patterns might emerge about how history unfolds or how human societies face these critical junctures?
That's a great thought to end on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into what turned out to be a truly remarkable few days in history, centered around June 24th. We hope you found these stories and insights as well as fascinating as we did.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.